Yeah, so we still don't have a breakthrough on this. There was some movement yesterday when the member states decided to use this clause in the EU treaties to be able to seize the Russian assets without getting unanimous approval. So that means Hungary and Slovakia can't block it or veto it as they were planning to do. And it's also an indefinite seizure. So that's definite progress, but we still don't have Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever saying, yes, we can live with the assets being sent to Ukraine, because he still has concerns that if Russia mounts a successful legal challenge to this after the end of the war, that Belgian taxpayers will be on the hook for repaying that. Now, what he's trying to get are bilateral guarantees from the other EU member states that they would foot the bill, that the EU would foot the bill collectively. He doesn't want that as an EU agreement. He wants that as bilateral national agreements. He wants this as a cast iron guarantee. And a lot of leaders in Europe, particularly German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, are really pushing back on this. They don't want to give that cast iron guarantee. Nevertheless, they spent yesterday, they spent today trying to find wording and legal provisions that can reassure the Belgian Prime Minister. So it's still a difficult issue, but they need to come to an agreement at next week's summit of EU prime ministers and presidents here in Brussels. That's the last European Council summit before the next one, which is in March, and Ukraine is going to run out of money in April. So if they don't come to an agreement about this next week, Ukraine is going to run out of money.
Interesting, as we're on air, as we're talking, Dave, Belgium, Bulgaria, Italy, Malta say they've issued a joint statement saying that they are in favour of, quote, long-term freeze of Russian assets in the EU, in Belgium. They've also said, again, this is Belgium, Bulgaria, Malta and Italy, that they will use Russian assets. The decision on that needs to be taken at the EU summit. So as you pointed to a moment ago, as repeated now in this statement, it looks like it's all set for a big moment next Friday in the EU. And also worth saying, as I often do when I see you, lights on behind you, floor 13, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, probably working in her offices where she also lives. But one thing that strikes me, in the midst of this shifting plan, this peace plan, we often see Volodymyr Zelensky going to those three European capitals, Berlin, Paris, London. What's going on in Brussels in terms of you being briefed from officials as to where the peace plan, how it's being shaped? You know, how much information do they have? What version are you getting?
Yeah, they don't have much information. The Europeans still don't have much input into this, and they're just kind of reacting. They often react to news as it's reported in the media. That certainly was the case today, when it seemed to catch people in Brussels by surprise that the U.S. has apparently offered Ukraine EU membership by 2027 as part of the latest draft of this U.S. peace plan. Now, the reports I've seen are claiming Brussels signed off on this, whatever that means. But as I'm talking to people here today, nobody seemed to know about this. The reality is, if any Europeans are telling the Trump administration that Ukraine can be a member by 2027, they know what they're saying is not true. That is impossible. The timeline for EU accession is usually 10 years, and there's still a lot of hurdles for Ukraine, and it needs unanimous approval by all EU member states, and Hungary and Slovakia still say they'll veto. And behind the scenes, it's more than just Hungary and Slovakia. There's a lot of public statements that, yes, Ukraine is definitely going to join the EU someday. Behind the scenes, there are real reservations about whether that's actually going to happen. In particular, there are concerns about how Ukraine's enormous agricultural sector would impact the rest of the bloc. There is absolutely no way that Ukraine would be a member in 1 year's time. I don't really understand where that's coming from in the peace plan.
It is fascinating to hear you tonight, and given that context, we'll also be discussing this and also the age of the envoy, Steve Witkoff, and manoeuvres both in Ukraine and in Gaza with our panel looking at the world this year. Dave, as always, thank you for your time tonight. Dave Keating, our correspondent in Brussels. Let's move to the Middle East. Let's move to Gaza, the humanitarian